Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into some really fundamental applied physics. We're diving deep into how charged particles actually move when they run into electric and magnetic fields. It's essential stuff.
Absolutely. It underpins so much technology. Think about everything from medical imaging, old TV screens, right up to massive particle accelerators.
Huge instruments.
And
Yeah.
while the real world often involves, plasmas with billions of particles interacting,
Mhm.
today we're simplifying. We're looking at just one single charge. How does it move in a given field?
Just one particle, okay.
Yeah, the goal is to really understand its path, its trajectory. How can we calculate it, predict it, and maybe even control it? That's where the physics meets engineering.
Right. Okay, so let's start simple. The first key idea. A charge enters a nice, uniform magnetic field by a Lawler. What's the main thing about the force it feels?
The absolute key insight here is that the magnetic force is always perpendicular to the particle's direction of motion. Always.
Perpendicular, so sideways.
Exactly. Sideways. Which means, unlike an electric field that can push or pull, speed it up, or slow it down, the magnetic force only steers. It changes the direction, but never, ever the speed.
Okay, so it's like a steering wheel, not an accelerator or a brake.
That's a perfect analogy. And if the particle's velocity happens to be exactly perpendicular to this uniform field, that constant steering forces it into a perfectly circular path. A circle.
A circle. And that predictability must be useful.
Immensely useful. That circle immediately tells us things.
Like what? How big the circle is, does that matter?
It matters a lot. The radius of that circle, well, it gets bigger if the particle has more momentum, meaning it's heavier or moving faster. But the circle gets smaller if the particle's charge is bigger or if the magnetic field itself is stronger.
Okay, so momentum makes it bigger, charge and field strength make it tighter.
You got it. So just by measuring the radius in a known field, you can figure out the particle's momentum or its charge to mass ratio. It's like a built-in measuring tool.
Neat. But what if it doesn't enter perfectly sideways? Like it comes in at an angle to the field lines?
Good question. Then you just think about the velocity in two parts. There's the part moving along the field lines, and the part moving across them, perpendicular. The magnetic force can't touch the part moving along the field, so that speed just stays constant, straight line motion. But the part moving across the field, that still feels the sideways force, so it still goes in a circle.
So it's moving straight and going in a circle at the same time.
Exactly. You put those two motions together moving forward while circling, and what you get is a helix, like a spring or a corkscrew spiraling around the magnetic field line.
Okay, that makes sense. A helix. Now, you mentioned measurement. How do scientists actually use this circular motion? I think you mentioned a momentum spectrometer.
Yes, precisely. It's a clever device that uses this exact principle. You shoot particles into a uniform magnetic field. They all start tracing out circles, or rather semicircles. Since the radius depends on momentum, particles with different momenta will trace out different size semicircles and land at different spots on a detector placed at the end.
So where they hit tells you their momentum, like sorting them by speed and mass.
Essentially, yes. But there's an extra clever bit called 180-degree focusing.
180-degree focusing. Why is that specific angle important?
It's about precision. Imagine you have a beam of particles, all with the same momentum, but they don't all enter the field perfectly straight. Some might be tilted slightly up, some slightly down.
Right. A real beam isn't perfect.
Exactly. Now, those slightly different entry angles mean they'll trace slightly different paths initially. One might do a slightly wider, shorter arc, another a narrower, longer one. But the magic of the physics is, after exactly 180 degrees, half a circle, they all come back together and focus at the exact same point.
Wow. So even if they start a bit wonky, as long as the momentum is identical, they end up in the same place after half a turn.
That's the beauty of it. It cancels out errors from the initial beam spread. It's like built-in error correction, giving you a really precise momentum measurement.
That's really elegant. Okay, so we can analyze motion. What about controlling it? Making beams go where we want. We need lenses, right? But for particles, electromagnetic lenses.
Oh, exactly. We need ways to focus particle beams, just like optical lenses focus light. And we can use either electric or magnetic fields to do it. Let's start with electrostatic lenses. You might remember these from old CRT monitors or TVs, those big glass tubes.
Vaguely. Big and heavy.
Right. Inside, they had shaped metal plates. Sometimes diagrams call them keys, quadrupole elements. You apply voltages to these plates. The electric fields between them give the electrons flying through a little sideways nudge a transverse impulse.
A kick to the side.
Yep. And the key is designing the shape and voltages just right. The total deflection depends on how long the electron is in that deflecting region. It's all calculated so that electrons starting from the same point but heading out at slightly different angles all get nudged back towards a single focal point down the line, just like a glass lens focusing light rays.
Okay, so electric fields can bend the paths. What about magnetic fields? Magnetic lenses.
Magnetic lenses are also super important, especially in electron microscopes. Usually they involve coils of wire, maybe with some specially shaped iron pieces called pole tips. These create a magnetic field that's cylindrically symmetric, same all the way around, but it's not uniform. It's stronger in some places, weaker in others.
Not uniform. How does that focus?
As the electrons fly through this non-uniform cylindrical field, the magnetic force makes them spiral inwards towards the central axis. Again, it acts just like a convex lens, bending light inwards to a focus.
And this leads directly to the electron microscope, which is incredible because electrons have tiny wavelengths way smaller than light. So theoretically, the resolution should be amazing, right? See tiny things.
Theoretically, yes. The tiny wavelength of the electron sets a fundamental limit called the diffraction limit, which suggests we could potentially see individual atoms. It's astonishingly small.
But there's always a but.
There's always a but. The practical limit usually comes from something else, spherical aberration.
Spherical aberration, like in camera lenses.
Exactly the same idea. No real-world lens, whether it's glass for light or an electromagnetic field for electrons, is perfect. Electrons that pass through the lens far from the central axis get bent too much compared to electrons passing near the center.
So they don't all meet at the exact same focal point.
Precisely. They converge over a small, blurry region, not a sharp point. And this blurring effect, this spherical aberration in the electromagnetic lens, is often what limits the actual resolution of an electron microscope, more so than the theoretical diffraction limit.
Huh. So the particles themselves could resolve finer details, but our lenses aren't good enough to let them. Frustrating.
It's a constant engineering challenge. Making better, more perfect electromagnetic lenses is key to improving resolution.
Okay, let's scale up. Big time. Particle accelerators, like synchrotrons. Particles are going around maybe thousands, millions of times.
Yeah.
They absolutely cannot drift off course. How do you keep them locked onto that perfect path?
Right. In those huge rings, just having a uniform magnetic field isn't enough. If a particle drifts slightly outwards in a uniform field, it just keeps spiraling outwards. Same if it drifts inwards. There's no correction.
It's unstable.
Highly unstable. You need what's called radial focusing. You need a magnetic field that provides a restoring force, constantly nudging any stray particles back towards the ideal central orbit.
How do you build a field that does that?
The trick is to make the magnetic field strength, $, vary with the radius, $3. Specifically, the field needs to get slightly weaker as you move outwards from the ideal path. We describe how quickly it weakens using something called the field index, usually labeled nullars. Think of nullars as just a number telling you the percentage change in the field for a percentage change in radius.
Okay, so the field has to drop off as you go outwards. Is there a specific amount it needs to drop?
There is a very specific range, yes, because you need focusing not just horizontally, pushing particles back towards the center radially. You also need vertical focusing to stop them drifting up or down out of the beam plane.
Ah, right. Both directions.
And getting both requires a careful balance. If the field drops off too quickly, meaning $1 is too negative or too large, if defined differently in some texts, you might get strong radial focusing, but the particles become vertically unstable and fly off. If the field drops off too slowly or not at all, or even gets stronger outwards, meaning $1 is positive or 0, you lose the radial focusing. The sweet spot, the condition for stability in both directions, is what we call weak focusing. It requires the field index $0 to be negative, but only slightly negative. Specifically, it must be between 0 and -1. So $1 is a narrow
It's a narrow window between 0 and -1, just a gentle decrease in field strength.
Exactly. It provides enough restoring force in both directions to keep the beam contained, but it's weak.
And weak became a problem for higher energy accelerator.
It did. Weak focusing requires very large apertures, very wide beam pipes, because the restoring forces aren't that strong. To get to much higher energies, they needed a stronger solution.
Which led to alternating gradient focusing, or strong focusing. Sounds like the opposite.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it was a revolutionary idea. It uses special magnets called quadrupole magnets.
Quadrupole, 4 poles.
Yes, 4 magnetic poles arranged around the beam pipe, north-south, north-south. Now, the funny thing about a quadrupole is that it focuses strongly in one direction, say horizontally, but it simultaneously defocuses strongly in the other direction,
But
vertically.
wait, it focuses one way but defocuses the other way? How does that help?
Yeah.
Seems like you fix one problem and create another.
That's the brilliant part. You don't use just one, you use a whole series of them placed one after another, but you alternate their orientation. So you have a sequence like focus horizontally, defocus vertically, then focus vertically, defocus horizontally, then focus horizontally again, and so on. FD, FD.
Alternating focus and defocus.
Exactly. And the net effect, averaged over the whole sequence, is strong focusing in both directions. It's like trying to balance a broomstick upright on your hand. You can't just hold it still, it'll fall. But if you constantly make small, quick back and forth adjustments, little kicks, you can keep it stable. The alternating gradients are like those stabilizing kicks for the particle beam.
Wow. So a sequence of focus-defocus actually results in overall focus? That's clever.
Extremely clever. It allowed for much stronger focusing, much narrower beam pipes, and was essential for reaching the very high energies we have today.
Okay, one more situation, the ultimate mix. What if you have both an electric field and a magnetic field buller present at the same time, and they're crossed, perpendicular to each other?
Ah, yes. Crossed fields. Now the particle feels both forces simultaneously, the electric force trying to accelerate it, and the magnetic force trying to turn it.
What kind of path does that create? Must be complicated.
The path is called a cycloid. If you imagine a point on the rim of a rolling wheel, the path it traces out is a cycloid. It can look like loops or sort of undulating waves depending on the particle's initial velocity when it enters the fields.
Loops and waves. Sounds messy.
Visually, maybe, but mathematically and conceptually, there's a beautiful simplification. That complex cycloidal motion is actually equivalent to something simpler. It's equivalent to the particle just undergoing simple circular motion, like in a pure magnetic field. But the entire circle itself is drifting sideways with a constant velocity.
So it's doing circles, but the whole circle is moving.
Precisely. A uniform sidewise drift velocity is superimposed on the basic circular magnetic motion.
And can we predict that drift speed?
Yes, and this is a really crucial result. The drift velocity, let's call it v dollar, is always perpendicular to both the E field and the B field, and its magnitude is incredibly simple. It's just the strength of the electric field divided by the strength of the magnetic field. Vd equals E.
Just E divided by B. That's it.
That's it. Remarkably, it doesn't depend on the particle's charge, its mass, or how fast it was going initially. Just the ratio of the fields determines this sideways drift.
That's powerful. Does that have applications?
Absolutely. This EB drift is fundamental to how devices like magnetrons work, the things in microwave ovens, and it helps explain how charged particles get trapped and move in planetary magnetic fields, like Earth's Van Allen belts. It's also used in velocity selectors. Only particles with a specific velocity can pass straight through crossed fields undeflected.
Amazing. So we've gone from a simple circle in a B field, which lets us measure momentum with that clever 180-degree focusing, through designing electric and magnetic lenses, dealing with their imperfections like spherical aberration, to the sophisticated focusing needed for accelerators, using weak focusing with the field index dollars, and then the powerful alternating gradient method. And finally, this combined E and B field situation resulting in a predictable drift. Quite a journey.
It really shows how these fundamental laws of E&M let us not just understand, but actually manipulate the world at the particle level. And the key takeaway for you thinking about this is how predicting and controlling that motion, whether it's bending a beam, focusing it, or keeping it stable, relies entirely on applying these force laws. From measuring mass to building microscopes and accelerators, it all comes down to controlling that trajectory.
Fantastic stuff. Thanks for walking us through that. And for everyone listening, here's something to chew on. We talked about that stability condition for weak focusing, $1 in dollars, for particles like protons, which have positive charge. What do you think happens to that condition if you're trying to accelerate antiprotons? They have the same mass but negative charge. How would that necessary field index 1L have to change, if at all, to keep them stable? Something to ponder until our next deep dive. Thanks for joining us.